Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the EcoCast by Actual Tech Media, and today's topic is Supercharging, Education and Government IT and Cloud Environments. On this event, you'll hear from experts at Atempo, Rubrik, and Unitrends. If you're on this event, it's very likely that you're part of an education, government, or public sector IT organization, and our goal with this event is to help you get your questions answered and find solutions to your technology challenges. The presentations on the event today are tailored just for you. This is a live event, and I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Now, before we get started, just a few things that you should know about the event. We've got some awesome gift cards. I'll talk about those in just a moment as our door prizes, as we always do on the EcoCast. I encourage you to use the questions panel there to ask your questions, and I will be doing a dedicated Q&A session with each of today's expert presenters. I'll also have a number of poll questions for you during the event, and I'll share the results of most of those poll questions with you. We want this to be a social event, and you can tweet directly from your audience console using the Twitter icon on the bottom of the screen. By doing that, the hashtag for today's EcoCast will be automatically appended. I'll be monitoring Twitter throughout the event, and of course, we appreciate you sharing what you learn on the EcoCast and hopefully the educational value that you've gained as well. You can find a number of resources there in your audience console in the Handouts tab, hand-selected by today's expert presenters, so I encourage you to check those out. The prizes on the EcoCast today are 3 Amazon $500 gift cards. I'll be announcing each one of those after today's 3 presentations. You must be live in attendance to qualify. And there are a number of other legal prize terms and conditions that you should be aware of in the Handouts tab. All prize winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media. And of course, you always have the option to donate your prize value to charity. We're also running our Best Question prize as well on this event for 3 Amazon $50 gift cards. Prize winners must submit a question during the session. We'll select one winner for each of the 3 sessions on the EcoCast today. Actual Tech Media will be looking for what we consider to be the best question, and we'll contact the prize winners after the event. Of course, you must also meet the Actual Tech Media prize policy. Thanks to generous prize winners over the years, we've donated thousands of dollars to charities, the charities you see here on the screen. If you win a prize and you'd like to help someone less fortunate, we would love to help you do that. We've done that in partnership with the Gorilla Guide Book Club. You can download free educational IT books at gorilla.guide. You can find a link for that in your audience console in the Handouts tab as well. The hashtag for today is ATM EcoCast, and like I said, that will be automatically appended if you tweet using the Twitter icon on the bottom of the screen. You can follow Actual Tech Media and me over on Twitter as well, where we post about the latest innovations in enterprise tech. You can subscribe to all the Actual Tech Media channels on YouTube, Facebook, and the 10 on Tech podcast. You'll find links in the top right-hand side of your audience console to our YouTube page, our Twitter page, and of course, our LinkedIn homepage as well. That's where we post all of our latest and greatest content. I'm excited to tell you about a new program Actual Tech Media is currently working on. IT vendors approach us all the time to find out if their technology pitches, demos, and marketing messages, and even websites are really hitting the mark with IT professionals such as yourselves. Now, we can't think of a better way to get them the feedback that they need than to engage you, our fantastic Actual Tech Media audience, to help out. We're building a team of established IT professionals like you to provide respectful but honest and candid feedback to vendors on their technology demos and pitches. So I'm asking you, would you like to become a reviewer for Actual Tech Media and let vendors know if they're hitting the mark with their marketing messages and educational content? We need your help, and as a thank you for your time in providing this feedback, we'll be sharing $50 Amazon gift cards each time you participate in a feedback round. Now, if you're interested, tell us a little about yourself by clicking the link in the Handouts tab that will take you to the Actual Tech Media IT Reviewer Survey. Simply fill out that survey, and you may be asked to join the Actual Tech Media IT Reviewer Program. This should be a fun way to share your experience and opinions, and also, earn some gift cards in the process. So thank you in advance for your participation. Now I'd like to set the stage for today's topic by talking for just a moment about the state of public sector IT in 2021. As all of you know, 2020 was a chaotic year for us all. And 2021 honestly seems to be really not that different. Hopefully, there's a little bit more predictability. We have a plan for the future in IT, but things have been especially chaotic for state, local government, and educational IT organizations. And in just a moment, I'll be asking you with a poll to share your feedback on your budgets and challenges. From what I've seen while talking to folks in public sector IT organizations, the challenges that you're facing include, of course, 100% work from home for IT staff and employees, and 100% study from home for students in educational institutions. But hopefully some of that is starting to open up. We're starting to see each other more in person. Things are headed in the right direction. But at the same time, we've seen a huge uptick in malicious attacks, and public sector is a prime target for these. We've also had rapid changes in priorities and budgets. Many organizations did sudden cloud migrations of some kind. And then we've also got massively growing data sets at the same time to try to optimize, ensure performance, and of course, protect. But the topic of today is supercharging your IT organization. And so what do you need to do that? Many of us will need innovative data protection and disaster recovery solutions. I know many organizations have aging data protection and DR solutions in place, which makes it really challenging to recover should you have some sort of ransomware attack. We also need state-of-the-art security to try to protect our organizations and our data from these types of attacks to begin with. We need intelligent data management to deal with these massively growing data sets. And then all around, we just need greater efficiency, scalability, and agility. Unfortunately, we seem to be continually pushed to do more with less, as that awful saying goes. Thankfully, on today's EcoCast, I believe we've got some innovative solutions to help overcome these types of technology challenges we talked about and help you to supercharge your public sector IT organization. So that's the state of public sector IT in 2021 as I see it. But now I want to get your feedback with a couple of polls. I'll bring those up now. All right, I just brought up the first poll here on the screen. And the question is, with the impact of the pandemic, how has your IT budget changed in 2021? And I'm curious to see the results of this. I'll be sharing the results here in just a moment, as soon as we get a good number of responses. And, hopefully you may be interested in the results as well. And then I've got a couple other poll questions following this. So I'll give everyone a moment to respond to this. If you haven't done these polls before, you just respond there in the slides window. All right, thank you everyone who responded to the poll. I do want to, let's see, I'll push out the results now. And I want to share with you here, roughly 38% say budgets stayed the same, but priorities were changed, which is always tough in IT, our ever-changing priorities, followed by, it looks like a kind of a tie between budgets stayed the same and budgets decreased. But I mean, really overall, if you add up the amount of responses for the budgets that increased, they stayed the same, or they stayed the same, but the priorities were changed, that leaves 77% that, had increasing or budgets staying the same. So really only 23% had a decrease in budget. So that's good to see out there in the world of public sector IT. Second question coming up on the screen now. And this is, which of these are your greatest challenges in 2021? I know I listed out a few of these in the state of enterprise IT. I added some more, maybe creative challenges, like doing more with less, keeping, current with changing technology. That's always a challenge. Justifying IT expenses. And then, people challenges in IT, just finding the right people, retaining the good people. Maybe it's the push to the cloud, or maybe it's data protection, data sprawl. Feel free to select multiple challenges. I know we don't just have one challenge in the world of tech. There's always numerous challenges to deal with. So I'll share the results of this poll here in just a moment. All right, thank you for all those responses. Let me share these out. And 57% connected with that do more with less saying, that awful saying, followed by 51% that said security and malicious attacks, and then kind of a tie between data protection, DR, the push to the cloud, justifying IT expenses. So really cool results. I'm going to actually grab a screenshot of that. That is cool to see. So thank you, everyone. And now let's go ahead and move on to our last poll before I introduce you to our first presenter. And this is, what's your time frame for adding new or updating existing IT solutions? The types of things we're talking about on the event today: data management, data migration, data protection, disaster recovery, security, some of these types of solutions. And I see all the comments coming in. Thank you, everyone, for those. Ned said, keeping current with changing technologies is our biggest challenge for cybersecurity. Brian said, with staff being spread even thinner, how do you prioritize the insufficiency of expertise and the resources to get the job done? That is always a huge challenge. That was a challenge I know when I was an IT manager as well. Ahmed said they're looking for solutions that are compatible with operating systems on all endpoints to protect against threats. Florence said we need to replace lost revenue with innovative grant sources. Good idea. Brian said their biggest challenge is around the risk and lack of security for data and getting the most bang for their buck with security solutions. Lots of excellent feedback. Thank you so much for those. We do appreciate that. Of course, also thank you for all the good morning and hello messages from across the United States and around the world. Appreciate those as well. And thank you to everyone who responded here to our poll question. It's now time to kick off the EcoCast with our first presenter. I'm excited now to bring on Mr. Skip Farmer, Director of Sales Engineering for the U.S. Public Sector at Rubrik. Skip, it's great to have you. Take it away.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Good day. Today, we're going to talk about modernizing your IT infrastructure. What I'd like to do is talk about this from a data protection standpoint. And there's a lot going on in your infrastructure today, and there's a lot that I think organizations want to do, especially in education and government. It's thinking about these data imperatives, right? So we want to modernize and automate. How can we do this in scale, right? The ability to be able to scale with growth, whatever that might be, and with changes within an organization, right? How does an agency change? Governmental departments, sometimes if there are changes, they're within teams, mergers of teams, organizational changes. How do you manage that and that data set and scale up and protect that data? And how do you do that as you look towards cloud? Right? A lot of organizations are looking to either extend into their cloud journey, and we've been hearing about this a lot, right, in the last couple of years, talking about the digital transformation and the cloud journey, and it still really is a cloud journey. There's still a lot of agencies and organizations that have put some portions of their data sets in the cloud, and they still need to protect it, and they've still put some portions on-prem, and they still have some departments within a governmental agency that aren't yet moved to the cloud. And this creates some inherent risks. So we've heard some about, the phishing attacks and some of those different risks, but there's also the risk about knowing what data is there and now managing that to this kind of last bullet item here, which is managing your data risk, not just from compromise, but also being able to comply with data regulations. So those combination of changes now are saying, well, how do I do these three things? This is a big portion of what organizations are trying to do to focus on with the data set. Now, part of the challenge has been, in some cases, that there's a legacy structure in place, and it's not to say that wasn't good at the time and wasn't the right thing to do. It's the challenge that over time now it's created some complexities. So I've seen a lot of organizations where there's a program that starts, and if you design and then implement, and maybe that's something that they're working on for 6 months, a year to get ready for this plan, right? And then by the time they roll it out, and then it's a phased-in approach. So you're already talking about potentially a year, maybe a couple years, depending on how big your agency is, how big the organization is that you're trying to manage these. And then you have a time where that grows, you're utilizing that infrastructure, and everything's great. But now over time, especially if it was kind of before your organization started looking at SAN implementation and new modernized approaches, now it's a little hard to manage. I use the analogy, I like my Jeep, right? I'm a Jeep fan, really enjoy my Cherokee, but it's an older Jeep Cherokee. My family's been telling me to get rid of it for a long time, because what's happened is it starts costing me a little more money, right? Every time I have to do something to it, it's harder to maintain and manage to it. And it's more complex to do that. And the other problem I have is I'm not taking advantage of any new features and capabilities that have come out since then, and I'm not able to really expand. I know that's a simplified view, but it kind of helps me to look at that perspective. Although I like it, it was great at the time. There's definitely a change that can be made now. So okay, all that said, what do we do now, especially around the data protection front, and especially around these data sets and managing this with all these different tiers in mind, right? And what I mean by tiers are, workload tiers, hypervisor tiers, cloud tiers. The first is kind of this framework that's starting in the middle. We need to have a way to modernize and automate that approach. And so some of this is around automating our SLAs and managing our upfront service level agreements. And then a lot of times agencies might say, well, I don't necessarily have an agreement for, XYZ, especially around data protection. A lot of times they weren't as solidified as to what the recovery times were, and then how to automate and measure that, and then meet some type of rapid recovery. This is going to be a core focus, and we'll talk about this a little more, because this obviously ties a lot into ransomware remediation and other challenges, right? That's just one of them. Now it's saying, well, I have this extended ecosystem. As you modernize, it's just, not modernizing just the data protection. You're hearing about modernizing security, modernizing reporting, a lot of different aspects of it. So how can I do this in a way to automate and tie into the rest of my ecosystem? And that's a framework of around an API first structure to allow you to connect into other parts of your IT organization to really extend the value, right? And you want to do this in a secure way. Now, you have to do this as well by being able to then extend into the cloud, right? If that's what your organization is looking to do. And in some cases, there may be different clouds or different structures. We see organizations that may have a mix, right? They may be running O365 for part of it, but a different cloud structure for something else, right? Or there are changes in how the cloud is being adopted by an organization. And then you want to do this with mitigating the data risks on top of that, the cyber-resiliency, the data governance. Now, why do I talk about this as a framework? It's because you have to put this model and a model like this in place to be able to add capabilities, to be able to add components and routinely check on that, right? So it's a closed loop process that allows you to do things where I'm setting up my data protection, I'm automating it, that's great, but I've got to have visibility into it. I have to have visibility into the data sets. I have to have more access than I had before to understanding what's there so I can make sure I'm compliant, I'm protected, but then also as I'm changing as I need to, especially with regards to a security profile. And that's why I see a lot of cloud frameworks or a lot of initiatives out there where they're talking about, framework models for different cloud configurations, and it's that same principle, right? It has to be built on this structure to make sure that you can evolve. And that's I think one of the cores of the modernizing of the IT infrastructure. It's giving a much better ability to evolve and grow as your organizational need changes, or new governance or compliance, or whatever the requirements are that are coming down the road. So let's talk a little bit about that. What does modernizing and automating really mean? And I'm going to look at this for modernizing and data protection aspects. So some organizations have a lot of different backup components. They have, in some cases, still offsite, still tape, still backup storage. And how can we distill that infrastructure that you might have? Remember, some of it might be legacy, and it doesn't mean that there isn't a way to evolve and move this and gain these efficiencies, so that what you can do is begin to take that more complicated distributed structure, automate a lot of the approaches, automate down, and create a secure by design solution to then modernize that protection. So one of the key things that I find through this is really around the accelerating the recovery. Right? So why are we protecting? Why are we backing up? It's really to recover. And a lot of the conversations always focus on data protection in those terms. It's interesting because I find that in our lexicon we talk about that a lot, and really it should be, the focus should really be more on the recovery. So with that, reduction of the complexity, that also comes up with the ability to improve not only your recovery time, speeds, and what you're doing, but also simplify this for the people that have to do this job. The administrators, the people that need the data back, and in some cases, unfortunately, if there's a problem at the data center, do you have a different set of people that may be doing the recovery? Either somebody doesn't have access, it's now at a recovery location, or people are dealing with, we counter this a lot in areas where they're prone to hurricanes, floods, tornadoes. What we found is teams that are actually doing the recovery, if it's needed, are not the teams that are in that location, because what's happening is they're dealing with their family, the protection, their immediate emergency needs, and someone else outside of that group is dealing with those accelerated recovery needs. And that's really a huge piece now too, because it allows you to, protect from, these natural disasters. It allows you to protect from, and get your data back for whatever's going on. And the data is going to come from a variety of sources, right? And you want to do that quickly and adjust your RPOs and RTOs, as needed for the data sets. Now, ultimately, there's a lot of that, cost savings is always in mind, especially now as there's competing elements for funding, right? We know that that's always a challenge. I think there's also really that time consumption cost for operators that's really a bit harder to measure in metrics. But I see that a lot where the teams, are doing the recovery. And obviously, if something bad happens and you're doing restore, as fast as we can is always the response. When do you need it back? The answer I get a lot of times is yesterday, right? So how do we plan to that and save in a lot of these varieties of focused areas? So it allows us, to do, to focus on the reduction, and ultimately you get the cost savings. But remember, that's savings in a couple different areas. It's, savings of time management, and they can go to the other roles. Like data protection is generally not, what a team wants to do, go in and focus on a day and say, I want to spend all my day managing these things. They say, this is part of my business. It's a necessary part of our organization. How do I minimize the time that I can spend doing this so I can spend focusing on the other pieces, right? Especially if you're in education, if you're in these different things. There are other things you want to be doing, especially now setting up remote learning, and how do we manage to that and adapt to that? And that's really, I think, a large aspect of this. So I want to talk about how we begin to do that. I mentioned SLA automation. So some of this, what we've seen is really kind of a paradigm shift. And this paradigm shift is going from a traditional kind of policy-based backup where it created all these jobs, and it was, individual data sources as they were protecting in. So the idea is, if I do this, and it was a traditional schedule, it might have been, and blackout dates, all these things that you had to manage to, how do I take a model today and move to a more automated model? And what that automated model would look like is a way where you can say, the SLA will take care of the data sets regardless of where they are. So it looks like the animation here isn't running, but what you would see in that animation is this idea that it's taking a lot of different data sources, and those could be application. You see Epic, SQL, MySQL, different components here, VMware, hypervisors, and saying, okay, I need to take some type of backup. I know the SLA because I know what I need to manage to my recovery time for these. So wouldn't it be nice if I said, well, this is what I'm managing to. These need to be archived. These need to be stored locally for some period of time. These just need to go to the cloud and move with some, based on some either time, some type of usage pattern, some different metrics. So if I can put that and automate that process and have everything that's in that bucket meet that automation, then would it be able to send that data out there, and the operator doesn't have to micromanage and go in and manage that, and it creates a lot less moving parts on the daily operation for an operator to create and to manage to. So when we look at our design to this, one thing that I do recommend is that we design a lot of cases really with our recovery in mind, not just the backup, but what's the expectation of each team for their data sets, right? Is it that I'm going to have just one machine back? Is it 100 machines? I can tell you that when I have worked with organizations in state and local and education that have had some type of ransomware attack, generally we're looking at, when we help recover from organizations, more than 60 machines at a time. I think the average I'm seeing is around 80. So that means they're really having to recover at scale. And then how fast do they have to get that back? What kind of time do you have? So these are all things that I recommend looking at, as you look in to managing not just to your SLA and automating that, but how fast am I need it back, how many machines, and how I'm going to structure my recovery. Now, you want to focus and make sure that as part of this, you have, encryption and some of these components that I think have become definitely more table stakes today, right? Storing something at rest, meeting your audit and compliance requirements for reporting, immutability, which you'll hear of a lot. And that's, I think, is really key. And it's making sure that the data protection sets are immutable. That means they can't be externally manipulated, so that if you need to do your recovery, you're able to get that back, and the data sets aren't attacked in some way as well. What we have seen is that, within, I think, probably at least the last year, maybe even a little longer, some of the new ransomware attacks are targeting backup sets as well. So initially they targeted just data sets, and then they said, well, you know what, if people are just able to recover, then this isn't really going to work. So now they said, well, let me try and target backup sets as well. So they are actively aware that organizations that prepared with data protection use that as their last line of defense, and they're trying to actively disrupt that for recovery, right? So that's a big piece of this as well. And the last is kind of access, of course, building in multi-tenancy role-based access controls for individuals, and being able to report and manage to that. Now, I mentioned early on also the automating and the API aspect of this. I think this is where, again, with modernization, you expect it to integrate into the rest of your infrastructure, right? Now, that could be monitoring and reporting. These are just some examples. You can create your own customized approach, especially if you have a customized tool that's being used in-house. But here, just wanted to give an example of some of the integration that's being done on a regular basis. Some allows for deployment of the protection, right? Service catalogs that can be used automation of the tools that are used. And I think the monitoring is key. One of the things that I talk about a lot is that you really can't manage what you can't see. And if you don't have visibility into that structure, whether it's through monitoring, through security monitoring, but also getting a point-in-time view of, here's my data protection, here's the state of it, the health of it, and here are trends that are coming with those data sets, really helps with how you work your overall protection plan, so you can see and evaluate how well it's doing. So we'd like to extend this to the cloud. So a lot of organizations are, at different states of this. So I'm going to talk about this from a couple perspectives, and you can fit it into where your agencies might be today or your organization and how it might work for you. So part of this is, the cloud archival aspect. I have some data on-prem in some cases. I maybe have a primary copy on-prem. Maybe I don't have a copy there, but I need to move a copy into the cloud somewhere. So how can I do that? I want to be able to do that securely, create a single policy around that, around my automation of the SLAs, and potentially tier it to take advantage of additional cost-saving methodologies that cloud service providers have, so that you can do those different tiers and realize that, say, hey, this data set, these logs, we have to keep for X amount of time because it's a requirement. Maybe you have some type of HIPAA regulation in your organization. Maybe you have, some other compliance requirement that you're trying to meet for storage time. And you say some of this data we have to keep, especially with logs. I see this a lot. We got to keep it a long time, but only if there's an incident do we actually do anything. And so in that case, it's very rarely retrieved, but they need to have it. So that might be something you want to tier off then to a lower cost portion within the cloud. Then of course there's a cloud migration, and I think there are two aspects of this. How do I kind of do this lift and shift approach, tape some of these on-prem hypervisor components, these guests, and recover them, and so that they're operational in the cloud? Or as I almost started to say, how do I recover those in the cloud, meaning that may be my DR location, right? Something happens on-prem, I need to recover it. Can I restore that in the cloud? The last piece is around cloud native protection. So this would be plugins for components within the cloud, such as databases, SQL, that are running on cloud native hypervisor components for you to protect in the cloud. Now, this is a little bit different than like O365 and some of those tools as well, but I'll talk about that in just a minute. So there is protection as well for those with plugins, but this cloud native protection here could be a combination, right? So it could be, let's say, O365, but it could also be, again, something that's running in a AWS cloud, for example, where you want to organize and orchestrate and manage your snapshots of whatever is running on those AWS EC2 instances that as part of your protection process, right? And it's not an all or none, so you don't have to have just all cloud or just on-prem to be able to manage this. It's designed so that you can grow out with your data protection solution. Again, what a lot of organizations I mentioned at the beginning are looking to do is try to scale, right? And that scale oftentimes means extending into the cloud. So as part of that, you want to reduce the amount of operational time that it takes, and you want to look at simplifying that policy management and extending that SLA principle from on-prem into your cloud protection. And so that's where you would also be able to improve your recovery times as well. So how do I get something back in just a couple clicks and recover it, whether that's Oracle, whether that's something from O365, whether that's something from Teams or SharePoint or something like that. So there are a lot of variety of the applications. And of course, you want to have visibility into this, especially as your organization might be extending and saying, okay, today we have a lot on-prem, but what if we have a remote branch, and maybe that's all they're doing at different organizations, just managing the O365, right? And there's a public cloud portion, and maybe you have a private cloud or data center component. Again, having the unified visibility, because all of this makes up the data that is important to your agency and your organization. So here as well, we have, and I mentioned before, O365, and this is how we would extend the automation and recovery. So the idea here is, again, taking that simplicity for how you set up, that quick start, easy to configure, and then get to that flexible recovery and have complete control of that. And right, and flexible recovery means, well, do I need to get, one message back? Do I need, what subset of this data set do I need to get back? Or also remind, I haven't talked about this yet either. In a lot of these cases, we also want to be able to determine what data we may not want to recover, right? And that's something that has some type of compromised file, some type of information that shouldn't have been there that you don't want to have back. And by that, I mean, in some cases, organizations have requirements to expunge or remove data based on some type of time period, and the data can't exist after that time period. So the same way, you don't want to be accidentally putting that data back. So talking now about, this slide's advanced there correctly. Talking about now extending it to the last portion in this paradigm, which is the mitigating that data risk, right? So we've talked about the automation portion of it, the extending to the cloud, and now we say, well, how do we mitigate the data risk, right? Now, within ransomware, we talked about historically backup was that last line of defense, and as I mentioned, in a lot of cases, ransomware attacks are targeting those backup sets. So if it's not properly constructed and managed, it actually may not be there for the recovery, and obviously that's going to be terrible. So how do we mitigate that? In a lot of cases, how do we determine, right, what the impact of that attack was, and we're calling the kind of the blast radius here to see, what was impacted, and we certainly don't want to recreate the issue, right? So if you're recovering something, you don't want to put that malicious data back, or you want to know what was removed, so you can, in some cases, these are targeting data sets simply to delete them as well, and they're trying different kind of, I think, approaches, right? So what if some data is deleted and you just want to get that back? How do you know what that data is? And of course, you need to be able to do that quickly with larger data sets, because the impact is getting larger. So from there, you want to ensure that the backups themselves can't be compromised. That's that immutability aspect. You want to be able to detect anomalies, right, and assess the impact. So some of these anomalies will be, how is the data changing over time? Are there backup sets that are running longer? Are you seeing backup that's, analyzing that data where the backup data is actually, it used to be, let's say, 10 terabytes, and all of a sudden it's either a lot more or a lot less. What kind of trends can you look for? And then once that trend is discovered, how can you go in and look a little more at that data to see how you can assess what kind of recovery is needed, and then, of course, manage that quickly. Now, on top of all this, a lot of organizations, don't know necessarily what's in all the data sets, but it's really complicated by having to meet certain types of requirements. Now, I know GDPR doesn't apply to all organizations here, but what we're starting to see is also a lot of state compliance requirements. So CCPA is one, California. Other states are beginning to implement some of their own. So how is this going to change the landscape to managing that governance, as you go forward? Again, when you modernize, being able to manage to those. And so we know some of the broad requirements, but how might that change with some of the state-by-state requirements? And I think that's, unknown at this time, right? That's something that's evolving and adapting. So if we have a dashboard where we could look at and assist with our regulatory compliance, where we can meet, and exceed our SLAs with that, and understand, if any point in time an auditor comes in and says, either it could be simple, where's this data set? where does any of this data live, right? So previously with some of the legacy environments, if it was on a tape, if it was in multiple stored locations, but the visibility to that wasn't clear, that in itself could be a violation. And then you have some kind of out of compliance fine or potentially issue where even if you need to get the data back or do something with it, it's not clear how easy that would be to get back and where that data would live. So those are certainly challenges, and there's no way to then classify that data for the organization of value and automate that process so you can say this data is important, this data is critical, and this other data is not critical, but that's just as important too. I've seen organizations that on site, they have a data lake, they have a lot of data. When they're doing their analysis then and saying, well, look, I'm just going to move everything to the cloud and it all goes there, at some point you're saying, well, does that data actually have to be there? Because now I have to do all those things that I had to do previously, secure it, protect it, make sure I can recover it, and make sure that it doesn't have the same risk of exposure there. So I think, that governance aspect is very important. Now, these things don't have to be done all at the same time, right? So it's not like you have to implement everything at once. Obviously, we recognize there's a phased-in approach, and organizations are going to be at different places with how they're looking at governance, with how they're looking at automation and integrating to other tools within their data center for API integration, and how they're managing to their SLAs. So this allows for a phased-in approach that gives you view into what you're doing, so it's measurable, and you can do a gap analysis to kind of figure out then what needs to change and get a good metric of how everything is going. So, the dashboard view would show, what your exposure here is to some of the information, risks. And so if you can see in the little icon there, the little picture, it has, HIPAA, GDPR. There you have the ability to create custom ones. This is really designed first with what are some of the core big ones, CCPA, GDPR, these others that I've been mentioning that have pre-designed policy components, so you don't have to go in and actually create that framework in there yourself. That's already done. And then as newer ones are added, I expect that those would be, as they get enforced more broadly, those would be part of that governance assessment as well. So when you take all this, I kind of wanted to summarize and bring that back. When you take a lot of this and then say, okay, what are my goals through this this data modernization component? Obviously, modernizing, automating allows you to adapt and change faster, right? That's within an organization, whatever's thrown at you, right? You can adapt and change to that. For the hybrid cloud, how do you begin your migration? You can prepare to scale it up, and you'll be ready when that comes into place. And if you're further along, you can already manage to that, knowing that you'll meet those metrics that you need to for wherever you might be in your use of cloud today. And then the last one is very important, I think, is the inspect and protect, right? We can't manage in some cases to what we can't see, and we need to have visibility in that. So we need to make sure we're protecting our data sets, we have visibility in our data sets, and we have the ability to adapt over time and monitor that, because we also want to manage by exception, right? We don't want to have to be doing day-to-day saying, is this okay, is this okay? We want to say, hey, everything looks great except for whatever anomaly might be showing up, and then you manage and inspect that anomaly, and that allows for much faster analysis of your environment. So with that, I want to say, thank you for your time today. I hope that I've answered some of the questions that have come in through the slides today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Skip. A really great presentation on the Rubrik solution. I know that this could help so many public sector IT organizations out there. I'm afraid we've run out of time here in our session for live Q&A, but I really appreciate your presentation. Thanks for being on the event.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
All right, I've just brought up the poll question that we do after each one of these sessions, which is what additional information would you like about the Rubrik solution? And I'll leave that up here for a couple of minutes. I encourage everyone to respond to that. We do appreciate that. That really helps the Rubrik team and Skip, of course, to know what follow-up you would like from this presentation. And feel free to select more than one on there as well. And I'll just leave that there for you to answer while I announce our first Amazon $500 gift card prize winner. This is going out to Eric Woodruff from Washington. Congratulations, Eric Woodruff from Washington. Still 2 more gift cards to give out on the EcoCast today, so make sure that you stay tuned for those. All right, thank you for all the poll responses. We do appreciate those. Let's now go ahead and move on to our next presentation. I'm excited now to introduce you to Mr. Mike Oakes, Senior Pre-Sales Engineer at Atempo. Mike, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Mike. It's great to have you on. Take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, and David, thanks for the actual tech team for inviting us to participate today. Also, real quickly, big thanks for joining. Hope you're staying safe with everything that's going on with COVID. As mentioned, my name is Mike Oakes. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect with Atempo, and I've been in the compute storage industry about 35 years. What I like to do, and I know we've got a lot of information, short amount of time, a brief introduction about Atempo, and then followed by a closer look at our data protection and preservation products. So, real quickly, who is Atempo? So we've been in the business about 27 years now. We bring to bear, experience in the field of data protection, preservation, management. As you can see by the slide, 2,000 plus customers worldwide, well north of 200 employees. And we enable organizations to preserve and manage their data ecosystems, regardless of that data set size, that data set's location, organization size. And data is usually the lifeblood of any organization, so being able to recover it when and where needed is crucial. And more importantly, keeping your data live today and working for you, it's become mandatory in today's 7x24 environment. So our solutions are designed to protect, store, facilitate movement, and provide easily searchable functionality for quick retrieval of assets when needed. Now, these solution sets that I'm talking about from us, they're software-based. And so we sell all software. You can reuse your own hardware. We have sizing guides that talk about what sizing you need for a server, and you can reuse your servers, you can reuse your hardware. So there's no need for forklift upgrading. You can even use VMs, but I'll just bring up a note about VMs for archiving or putting these off to tape libraries. It's not supported, not only just from us, but if you look at some of VMware's notes and others, going through an iSCSI layer to a tape drive doesn't work. It's not reliable, so it's just not supported connected to we call a data mover. And I'm going to talk more about those when we get into the architecture a little bit. So that being said, you're probably thinking, why did I preface about Atempo here with about this slide? And what I wanted to do was give you a little bit of Atempo, and then, what we saw coming as some of the crucial elements today to address in the market space, not just government education, research, and some of the other fields that we address. So I'm actually going to jump to bullet number 2 first here, ever-increasing data sets. And this is, unstructured data is growing exponentially. So how do you manage it? More importantly, when you're managing, where is it located, right? And it's usually some type of homogeneous data silo. 2 universities may be collaborating, or 2 facilities, and one may have GPFS, one may have Lustre, another one may have some type of NAS. How do you take those homogeneous data silos, turn into a heterogeneous or seamless architecture to help you manage that data set? That's important. That's something we had to put in the product, and we wanted to put in the product. And then, how do those sites collaborate? How do they share data? But how do they do so, not just seamlessly, but protected, meeting regulatory requirements, security, cyber security, right? Encryption, all of those things needed to be done to protect the data and ensure when you need an asset, it's there. So that's something we had to have in the product. And air gap protection, going to tape. Tape for a while was going away, but some of the viruses and other things that have hit, air gap protection's back. How do I protect my data both on-prem and then move something off-prem or to a different location, or just maybe it's on-prem, but like I said, air gap, tape drive, put in a vault, whatever it happens to be. One thing that isn't mentioned here in this slide, and I wanted to bring it up, is the ever-shrinking backup window. Now, how do I get my data protected that much quicker, right? There's that window of vulnerability. How do you reduce it? That's something we definitely want to have in the product. So that being said, what is Miria per se? So it's a file-based management tool. We're file-based, and we're basically software. Like I said, you can use your own hardware. We use your infrastructure. What you see here at the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock position, Miria for backup, Miria for archiving. These are the tried and true, battle-tested, almost 30 years now in the market. They've evolved over time. They brought in new feature sets, new storages, and so forth. But they're core of the engine. They're these pillars. So the other two that you see, the one at the 9 o'clock position, we call it Miria for data moving. Think of this as synchronization, replication, copy, sync, and move, automated task movement, even manual task movement by a user, should you so assign users the permission to do it. That was important to have for collaboration purposes, keeping things in sync in distant locations. These three that I'm talking about here, think of them as a perpetual product, right? You buy the software, a license, and then you go on and you have support year after year and so forth. The one at the 3 o'clock position here, Miria for migration. This one was a needed facet to have, needed tool, so to speak, in the tool bag, because with newer storages coming down the pike, that explosion of data, that data tsunami as we call it, you had to be able to, one, collapse storage infrastructures or come off old, antiquated storage. I want to get on something bigger, faster, smarter, faster being AI, right? Take advantage of the analytics in the storages. How do you get there seamlessly? How do you do it live in a production environment where your source that you're coming off of stays live for users? You can transfer data to the new storage and bring it live when ready, or basically actually migrate while running on the new storage. That's a feature you can also do within the tool. Think of this one as a time-based type of thing. So you purchase or you rent the software, so to speak, for X amount of months. X amount of capacity needs to be migrated. And we do it as a professional service in some time. And once it's done, you can shut it down. Basically, the software license expires, and you're running on your production storage. So real quickly then, what's that architecture I'm talking about? As I said, we're all software. So what you see here at the middle left here, you'll see something labeled Miria and another one grayed out underneath it. These are Miria servers. They hold the database. You can have a second copy, and it shows two talking to the same system here. True HA environment, you'd have two independent, basically PostgreSQL databases that we run. We'll keep those in sync over secured interconnect. So encrypted, right? That's important, especially in today's world. Nothing goes over the wire, so to speak. If we're talking to our servers, it's basically clear text. So we can encrypt in flight. You can have, I said, two servers. These are effectively, think of it as a traffic cop. Their responsibility is to manage the cluster software cluster we're talking to. They are basically all communication, CLI, web UI, all user interfacing, all management done through the server. No user talks directly to a data mover. We call an agent. Now this could be on your hardware. It's just some software we overlay, Red Hat, Windows, Linux, you name it. We're open compliant on most softwares. We have our own matrix that you can get from a compatibility guide. These data movers, their name tells you everything they do. They're responsible for moving data from point A to point B or from primary to secondary. Now, within these data movers, you can actually think about pooling these data movers. Now, pooling, why am I talking about pooling for a second? Because I can actually pool data movers together, and I can move data between A and B, primary, secondary. I could have basically segregated data movers for high security data that all they do is they transmit between 2 points and they're completely segregated. What this gives you, though, is the advantage to do some things to reduce that window of vulnerability I mentioned earlier. We have some tools under the hood that we call fast scan and parallelization we do with it. So in conjunction with the software coming from the Miria server who's in control, it can start to divvy up job workflows. What I mean by that is I can have a job and say, maybe I want to run, in this case we have 3 datas. I'm going to do 6 sub-jobs with a particular task that's going to run. And I can set some threshold and say, after so much time, or so much data has been scanned that needs to be acted upon, or so many files have been scanned, fire up a subjob that meets that requirement, and put it on one of the data movers. Now, I'm moving data. I'm looking for data at the same time. I'll continue to scan for more data. And if I find something that meets that threshold again, I'll put it on the next data mover. And I'll keep doing that. Now, if I had 6 subjobs, I'd put basically 2 on each data mover. So I'm getting load balancing with this pooling. I'm getting basically the ability to keep everything in parallel and check, so to speak, while I'm running. Now, there's also cores on each one of these. We also have the ability to parallelize and multi-thread, sorry about that. So we could turn cores into copy engines. Those engines, so to speak, will move data. So now I'm parallelizing, I'm multi-threading, all at the same time. And so I'm getting my data protected that much quicker. But there's one more tool left in the bag here, something called fast scan and snapshotting. What we can do, if it's a file system and or an appliance, we can talk to the API, GPFS, Luster, but we don't do it. I'll talk about Luster in a second. We don't do a snapshot on Luster. Or some type of NAS, Isilon, NetApp, Cumulo. There's a couple of others as well. We can use the native onboard functionality of that appliance, do a snapshot. We'll validate that on the first walk and see. Doesn't matter if it's archive, backup, copy, sync, and move, replication. The next time around we go to run an incremental, we'll say to catch up, or to do some other job function, we'll take another snapshot. We'll compare the two. We'll ask for a differential change list. We'll take that, we'll import it to the server. And now instead of walking the file system, we're using the snapshot and the change list. And now we're divvying that up and sending it out to data movers. So things that could take hours to walk a multi-petabyte file system can take seconds with a snapshot. Now I've divvied it up with fast scan. I've moved it out. I've parallelized all that movement. My vulnerability window has shrunk. My impact to user experience is literally none because I'm not walking a file system anymore. And these tools can be used for cloud, tape, disk. You get to choose the basically the appliance you want to talk to. We call them storage manager containers. And the reason why I'm bringing up a storage manager container is I may want to have multiple copies in multiple locations of the same piece of data, maybe locally, across country, across the world. I can store it on disk. I can store it on tape. You have in the notion of storage manager containers an extra level of protection, so to speak. There's an extra hash that you can assign to each, and they can be independent. The reason why I bring this up is I can have a hash for a copy on tape, a different hash for the one on the cloud or private storage, different hash for one on a disk storage. Should any one of them not match and we go to do a recall, we will automatically call from the other one. It's an independent hash. We know which one goes with which. We'll flag it as an issue. We'll notify the administrators we need to take an action to fix this particular file in this particular location. Well, we've already retrieved the data that's correct and given it to the user or the program that's needed it. So we don't impact the front end. We do things on the back end to ensure you're safe and secure. So real quickly, getting into more about this architecture, and this is more like, think of this as more of a use case, 3 locations. Could be LA, New York, and London. Site 1, Site 2, Site 3. You notice 2 Miria servers. Full redundancy. We'll keep things encrypted over the wire for the database. Database is protected with SHA encryption. So should one go down, one site go down, a network connection go down, I still have full resiliency. I'm still running. If you notice, there's multiple data movers, 2 at each site in this example. Maybe I want to do a backup. We'll use this as an example. From site 1 to site 2, I want to use basically maybe the object storage in site 2, but I want to put a copy of on my tape on site 1. I can do that. The important thing here is with those storage manager containers, I get my hashes, but with data movers at every location, you can say, you know what, when we set this up, I want all data to go encrypted from these data movers. So what we'll do is we'll pick up the data for transfer on site 1, we'll encrypt it on that read, we'll send it across the wire to the other data mover, encrypted. You can give us the key, we can use SSL, TLS, we'll decrypt it on the other side, apply it to that storage appliance that we want to talk to. Quick, efficient, and protected. That's the name of the game here. Coupled with that, I also can, if I wanted to, I could use any location as a backup for the other. And there's another tool that we have under the hood that we call Snap Store. You can literally have, maybe I'll use a GPFS IBM Spectrum scale as an example. You can have an IBM Spectrum scale that we're backing up, and you can do it in a mode we call one-to-one. And what this allows you to do is you could back it up to a NAS, or you could back it up to another slower, smaller GPFS or some other type of cluster that we can talk to the API to, and it will make it look, even though it's a backup, just like the source. Should that source fail, you can repoint your users to that target, that backup, and run on it immediately. Then you can reconstitute that source for whatever reason it went offline. Maybe it was network issues, something happened. When it comes back online, we'll just replicate the data back on a synchronization task, and you can move your users back to production, and your backup is now running as your backup again. Right? So nearly online movement of users, data, and so forth. Really good for those production environments. So what does all that entail? How do you manage it and so forth? So if some of you remember earlier on a Tempo ADA, Tempo Digital Archive, we had a lot of administration user, but they were thick, thin client. We've switched that now to using HTTP, HTTPS. So you can do a secured connection, web browser. You'll see here on the screen, and I hope it's not too small, this one I've logged in as root. Now, if you have users and you set them up to have access, they're only going to get to see and access those things you've given them access to within the product line. This one here, you'll see something called Easy Move, Migration, and Repository. Think of repository as your archive and backup locations. They're just happen to be the locations where I'm going to put some type of data. In here, we're going to use Video Archive for an example here. If you notice, right next to the Video Archive, you'll see something in blue. It looks like a file folder. That is, think of it as a repository. That's a repository location of data. The representation you're seeing is out of our database. So you see it in a file system, a view that you can both search for metadata and also search on criteria. So user, group, UID, everything you can think of for metadata, you can search on in there. Now, you can, in this case, I want to just move, I'm recovering a file. I want to take my data here out of the video, and I want to move it into what you see on the right-hand window there in the bottom is you'll see a highlighted blue disk. That's a storage target, right? So I can pull it back. I get to choose where it goes. You know, you can do this as an administrator, or you can give users, and you can get very granular on how you give users access to what they can move, what they can do, what they can't do. We do integrate with AD and LDAP. We do not give carte blanche access to the data. We expect the administrator or administrators to go in and say, I have this user, I have this group, and they're allowed to do X, Y, and Z. But we do not, because it's your data, that's your lifeblood, it needs to be protected. Don't just give open access because someone has LDAP access. Now, all you do here is basically you can click add. I can do multiple moves here, or retrievals, and just tell it to validate, the little green button at the bottom. What can happen in some instances, you have basically multiple instances of versions of a file, and we store them. If it's a change, we're going to store it. Now, you can see here, it can have multiple instances. It tells you modification time, creation time, storage time, if there was a hash, what type, and what it was when it went with it. You can go and start to drill in. Think of it as basically time navigation. Which file do I want, and where do I recall it to? You get that granularity all the way through in the database. You can also, one other thing, we'll store metadata. You can tell us metadata to store. You can create your own dictionaries, and you can actually tag after the fact. So you can go into the repository here, click on a file, add metadata to it, and go ahead and have it stored in our database. So that being said, because I know there was a lot of time, I'm going really, really fast here. So I've shown you a little bit about the product. You're probably asking yourself, maybe, hopefully, how do I get my hands on it? How do I deep dive? How do I POC? What is it all about? So you can, of course, contact us. There's also a great way to go through some of our elite partners. One of them here, and a quick word about them, is we're pretty selective on who we partner with. We don't just pick anybody. And just like you, when you're looking for a partner, someone who's knowledgeable right in that field, understands your environment, the workflows, applications, and we're the same way. So I wanted to mention these guys. They've been a great partner of ours, elite partner, Applied Data Systems. These guys are truly, my opinion, top of the game, right? They're experts in HPC, machine learning, AI, single node, multi-node clusters, right? Their breadth of knowledge is second to none in the industry. So if you've got a workflow need or a system design or redesign, please reach out to them. They're a great organization to partner with. So, kind of wrap it up here. I know I went pretty fast. Why a tempo, right? And so managing complex data sets, we talked about at the beginning, right? Homogeneous data silos, distant locations, collaboration and sharing. How do I do that seamlessly? Don't impact that user workflow. Reduce or eliminate that window of vulnerability for data during a backup or an archive. Right? We enable that feature set. More importantly, it's cost effective. And what do I mean by that? Because it's a single software appliance, but you can do archive, backup, that copy, sync, and move. Offload the admin IT staff, have users archive and back up their own data. Right? Recall it when needed. Specific locations, all within the same tool set. You don't have to buy separate tools. And of course, we hear here 24/7 sun never set support. So what do we mean by that? So we have facilities for support in EMEA, the United States, and Asia. So wherever you happen to be, we'll have somebody on standby or on, basically on call on the phone and monitoring a queue. Best way to get a hold of us is email a lot of times to pick up that call. So when you need help, something actually goes awry, whether it's accident, nefarious, whatever it happens to be, you have a team behind you there to back you up. It's your data, right? So our mantra here is it's any data, but it's your data. So it's any data, anywhere, anytime. That's the mantra of the product. That's the mantra of our support. When you need us, we will be there. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to the team. Thanks, everyone.
Great presentation, Mike. As always, really cool product here from Atempo. I know this could help a lot of companies out there, a lot of IT organizations. We do have some questions for you from the audience, and while we do that, we've got two polls. I'm going to bring up the first poll now. I want to call everyone's attention to the question on the screen is, what is the volume of your petascale data set? So we'll leave that up there. What is the volume of your data set? And take the first question here. Let's see. Daniel is asking, when it comes to protecting his data, he said that they're really challenged by their backup window. He doesn't even have time to get his incrementals done, much less a full backup done in his backup window. Do you have any tips for him? Could this solution help him?
Sure. So that fast scan and parallelization one will really help. A lot of times, too, breaking it up a little bit more. And that goes to the parallelization I talked about with data moves, making subtasks for the backup instead of doing full level file system. We may be already doing this, David. Break it down to the lower levels. Just get those things that need to be changed and moved off. Can greatly help reduce that backup window.
Excellent. Excellent. Good tip. Let's see. Another question they're asking about, let's see, automated data classification for time savings that you mentioned. They're asking, how can it effectively learn and scan the data? Do you want to share a little bit more details on that, how that works?
So when you say learn and scan the data, I'm assuming they're talking about something on a metadata perspective and so forth. So what we do when we actually scan the data and move it for an archive or some type of action, we collect it all and put it in our database. Now, what you can do is, from the perspective of learning the data, you get the ability to search it. I'm going to give you a little bit of a, we'll call it a heads up of what's about to drop in the next 6 to 8 months. There's going to be a tool that you'll get with Miria. I'm calling it a tool. It's really another appliance that integrates directly with it. It's going to be our version of analytics that allows you to learn about all the data, even stuff we haven't talked to yet. And you can reach into that. You can pull information. You can pull metadata, user, timestamps. There's a multitude of things you can search on to create your own dashboards to learn more about data that is even outside your workflow, then tag it, and we'll act upon it later.
Very cool. Very cool. I like that. Let's see. There's another question they're asking. Can I really use the same platform to manage all Miria features, backup, archive, and more?
Absolutely. That was the whole design. We wanted to give you a robust platform, but simplify the management. So you may only need backup today and not need archive for 2 years. Drop it in when you need it. Same product, same platform, just license it.
Nice. Nice. That doesn't happen enough in the world of IT.
No.
So yeah, that's cool to hear. Let's see. Let's go ahead and move on now to our next question. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to respond to that poll, because I'm bringing up the next poll question. Simple question here. What additional information would you like about the solution from Atempo? And I'll leave that up while we do the remainder of our questions in the queue. What about migration? There's a question here. Can this help me to migrate user shares from one NAS to another and keep access rights fully intact after the migration?
Absolutely. So from a migration standpoint, now depending on the type of share you're talking about, whether it's an export or a share, so NFS, CIFS, we'll migrate that data or data movers with the same protocol access. So if you're doing things on your share that's SMB, we'll migrate on Windows. Why? To do exactly what you just asked. Preserve the file system semantics, all the ACLs, all the permissions. Same thing we use NFS on Linux to preserve the POSIX. You can migrate those over a little bit short amount of time, or maybe it's a longer window. You get to choose, and we do that basically in multiple modes. Echo and contribute are the two big ones for synchronization. Echo is mirror, source and target, but if you want to actually work on the target, you put it in contribute mode. The difference there is Echo, think of it as a RAID 1 mirror, is making source just look exactly like target, including all deletes. Contribute is do everything but the deletes. So you can actually have a workflow that does both.
Excellent. Excellent. Let's see, a lot of good questions. The next question that I see here, does Atempo Miria provide an option for disaster recovery?
Yes. So that, from a perspective of, I talked about SnapStore, that's one way to do it. So you can actually have, basically think of it as a live backup running as your DR site. So should you fail, should something fail to your production, point your users to the other side or the other site, and continue running while you reconstitute that first production site.
Excellent. And then there's a couple of questions here around security. Specifically, what type of data encryption does Atempo support in flight?
So in flight, between our data movers, like I said, we can take and use a key that you provided us, or we'll use SSL TLS version 1.3 for handshaking between the two data movers, or the data movers in a Miria server to encrypt the data and protect it.
Okay, nice. And then I'm afraid we're running out of time here in our live Q&A, but if folks want to get started with Miria, what's the best course of action?
Right off the bat, go straight to www.atempo.com or hit up one of our partners, Applied Data Systems. Got a lot of great information from both.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much for being on the event today, Mike.
All right. Thank you.
And thank you to the folks at Atempo for supporting the EcoCast today. Make sure that you check out the handout. It's there in your audience console. It's a 6-page solution brief on the Miria Atempo solution. You can get more information and might answer some of your questions. You can check it out after the EcoCast. All right. For anyone who hasn't answered the poll question yet, I encourage you to do that. I'll just leave it up while I announce our next Amazon $500 gift card winner. This is going out to Joseph Messano from Michigan. Congratulations, Joseph Messano from Michigan. Still another gift card to give out on the event, so make sure that you stay tuned for that. And with that, it's now time for our next presenter today on the EcoCast. Welcome, Mr. Adam Margett, Technical Specialist at Unitrends. Adam, it's great to have you back on.
David, how are you, sir? How is the EcoCast going today?
It's going excellent. Looking forward to your presentation.
Awesome. That's what we love to hear. Are you ready for me?
I'm ready, Adam. Take it away.
All right, excellent. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, all of our actual tech listeners out there, wherever it might be that you're dialed in from. As David had mentioned, my name is Adam Margett. I'm a member of the technical marketing team here at Unitrends, and we're going to talk to you today about how we are doing our part in supercharging IT and cloud environments for education and government entities. And today our focus is really going to be around what we call our unified BCDR platform. So talking about business continuity and disaster recovery and kind of the three parts here. We'll talk a little bit about some of the trends that we've seen, gaps in the marketplace that we're looking to fill in preparing for the unexpected. We'll introduce you to our platform, tell you a little bit about what we've been working on here at Unitrends, and wrap things up with the Q&A. But ultimately, I think that, specifically when we're talking with SLED, we hear a lot of the same challenges from educational entities to government, and whether we're talking to a small, private school that's doing K through 5 or a larger township, there are a lot of the same challenges: constrained budgets, small IT staff, high demands for availability, and heavily regulated industries. But specifically, when it comes to backup and DR, we see a lot of fragmentation and a lot of manual aspects to working with backup and different recovery processes. There are some things certainly that you can automate today, policy-based scheduling, recovery testing in some cases, but making sure that everything works and having to go through those different screens, hopping across different products to solve problems as they arise on-prem, on endpoints, or in cloud. We're seeing that really start to consume people's day, a quarter plus of your day, depending on the environment, and that can be a significant expense. Not just the challenge of being locked into kind of a singular licensing approach with a vendor at the time, and as the environment shifts, they may not have necessarily that flexibility, but especially when you factor in the amount of time that folks are spending, that adds to a pretty significant cost as well. Today, certainly I don't want to harp on the pandemic and the conditions over the last year, but things have changed. We're facilitating operations through technology, but we've got to accommodate all sorts of different users. There's a spectrum with regards to their technical literacy and their proficiency. We're accounting for different devices and kind of different situations for each household, hundreds, if not thousands of users that we're dealing with. And I think that, the constant connectivity has really led to demands in uptime. Classes have to be scheduled, testing has to be conducted, payrolls need to be processed on time, especially in government emergency services, EMS, police, fire departments have to be readily available. They need to be able to route their vehicles, have access to different call systems or call centers that are available. And as new apps are emerging, as SaaS continues to become increasingly mainstream, we need to think about, where are apps or things creeping into our environment that may not be sanctioned by IT. Shadow IT has become a really significant security risk. It's something that we hear about, especially from a lot of our education customers, where they've got students on these devices that are going to sites or leveraging applications that aren't necessarily sanctioned by IT. They're prone to phishing bait and other social engineering tactics, and these unsophisticated users are opening up these new threat vectors. When we think about the challenges of kind of stretched IT departments, reported by Education Week, most states this year, the current revenue is stacking up to less than what they were expecting. In some cases, Ohio, Vermont, maybe out in Kansas in the Midwest, current revenue is only a little bit lower than those projections. But in a lot of coastal regions or areas that are relying on tourism or state funds, New Jersey, New York, Alaska, Nevada, they're coming in with really significant cuts. And we think that this is going to start to trickle down. And the result is that IT pros are being asked to do more with less. You've got these multifunctional users that have to be experts in help desk, in remote learning and remote devices, networking, server storage, backup, cloud applications, power and cooling. The list goes on, but the environments aren't getting any easier to manage. On average, organizations are operating 2.2 private cloud deployments, 2.2 public cloud, and 3+ backup vendors, as we saw on the easier slide. And almost compounding this, I came across some really interesting research that was published by the Conference Board here in the United States. There are about 64,000 computer science graduates annually, and that's to fill more than almost 500,000 IT computing jobs, more than 500,000 unfilled jobs in the U.S. And that's where, when we talk about automation and some of the things that we can do to reduce that strain on IT, can really be a benefit to you. But the other threat, we've got less resources with which to work with. We're wearing a lot of different hats. We've got different users to protect. Ransomware has become a really significant threat. Roughly about 30% of successful attacks on government and education in the past year have been due to unintentional disclosure by end users, remote faculty, students. There's been an uptick, 250% increase in attacks on education, and a lot of this we see is caused by phishing email scams, the misuse of social media, and other kind of careless activities. Students are bringing in their own devices, and it creates a real management nightmare for IT. IT. The impact is significant. On average, about more than 7 days of downtime. And there was an incident last year at Clark County School District in Las Vegas that resulted in a data breach. They were impacted or encrypted by a ransomware attack, and the threat actors demanded to pay that ransom. But it's kind of a reminder that the way in which these threat actors are targeting data and attacking organizations, not all of them can be resolved today with a good data backup. This double extortion, which involves the stealing of sensitive data before the detonation of the encryption payload, and then when organizations refuse to pay that ransom, the threat actors come back and they threaten to publish or sell that data if it goes unpaid. It's leading to huge costs of these breaches, anywhere from 1.3 to 4.8 million on average. And it was kind of interesting because the cost of the breach factored into account loss of potential customers and loss of returning revenue, which you're not going to see impacting governments quite as much. But that factor of downtime and the potential breach of personally protected information represents a significant risk. There's also the means in that the data that's under attack is highly proprietary, and you're tasked with protecting it. And one of the biggest things I found when researching and talking to a lot of our customers in this space is that the long-term data that's being retained has to be accessible. When you've got a user request for particular records, you're undergoing business analysis or audit, investigation, e-discovery searches, there has to be a reasonable expectation to retrieve that data until it's no longer needed for administrative, legal, audit, or operational purposes. And these will vary from state to state and under different regulations. Under CJIS compliance, there's a 1-year minimum of retention, but especially in education, that can be a tricky problem with the cost of storing data in storage. In Michigan, for example, records need to be retained for the duration that the student's enrolled, and then 3 years post-graduation. But in Connecticut, it's 6 years post-graduation. So it adds to that overhead and those ongoing management costs. The other factor is that this data is living in new places. SkyHigh Networks did a usage analysis of more than 20,000 cloud services and found that just over half, about 58% of sensitive data, whether that's confidential financial records, personally identifiable information, and so forth, was being stored in Microsoft Office documents that were living in the cloud. So if that sensitive information is a proxy to business-critical data, the dominant platform for working with this information is shifting to Microsoft Office. They saw tremendous growth last year. Google and Google Workspace are not far behind. So there's a corresponding growth in the volume of sensitive data that's now living in these cloud services. And yet, more than 3 out of 4 organizations suffered a SaaS data loss incident in the last 12 months. And this is often because it's customers, not Microsoft and not Google, that are operationally and contractually responsible for the data. I pulled from Microsoft's volume licensing agreement and just highlighted some of the human error and some of that unpatchable weakness, if you will, that Microsoft is not protecting users against. These are some of the most common causes of data loss: human error, malware, ransomware, phishing attacks, malicious behavior, even sync or configuration errors. You input a faulty script and crash a SharePoint. They're going to be limited in what they can do with regards to recovery. And so attacks that are relying on social engineering rather than technology, brand impersonation of law enforcement, has become a really tricky challenge. The threat of phishing has grown exponentially, and depending on who you read, there's been a 4 to 6x at times increase in the volume of phishing, which equates to roughly a new attempt every 39 seconds. Last year, 74% of organizations in the United States were victims of a successful phishing attack. That was about 30% higher than the global average for last year, and about 14% higher than 2019. And more than a quarter of these attacks are specifically designed to target users on these SaaS applications, O365 and the Google Workspace. Now, some of your frontline users may be susceptible to those phishing attacks, but it's still about 78% of IT leaders that say that the C-suite is the most likely to be targeted. But what I thought was really interesting is the way in which these attackers are getting more clever. They're shifting their focus. And while those top-line executives are still targets, where organizations may be lax in protecting frontline workers, cybercriminals are taking advantage. According to Symantec's Internet Security Threat Report, 5 of the top 10 phishing subject lines in Q4 included things like changes to your health benefits, a security alert from an unusual Twitter login, action required for your Amazon Prime membership. It's been declined, Zoom meeting errors, stimulation cancellation requests. So people are panicking, they're clicking through, they're getting in and they're getting engaged, and they're getting really crafty at how they're able to take advantage. So we've got a really wide range of threat vectors, data that's expanded and living a lot of places that we need to account for. That's ultimately where we're trying to come in and help our customers start to manage and really streamline and operationalize the efficiency of these platforms. We've been in the space for more than 30 years, working in data backup and disaster recovery since the late 80s, but really accelerating a lot of our growth with our merger with Kaseya in 2018. And with some of the other business units that are in Kaseya, we've got access to really purposeful workflow integration. So we're augmenting traditional backup and recovery processes with security, with documentation, with remote monitoring and management. We're looking for gaps where we can fill in either from an automation standpoint or gaps in traditional ways of doing things that we can do to deliver a complete stack for our users. So not just do you have that local technology that you're deploying, the hardware or software that lives in your data center or is backing up your cloud-based data, but behind that dedicated cloud infrastructure, you can see pinpoints on the map there of where Unitrend's cloud data centers are located in the regions in which we offer long-term retention and our disaster recovery as a service worldwide. And that's the last piece. You've got that team of experts that are responsible for the entire stack. So regardless of whether you've got an issue with hardware, software, replication to the cloud, DR services, you're reaching out to the same support organization to support that BCDR infrastructure. What that ultimately looks like and what the platform is striving to do is to deliver you a complete automated and priced right platform. It's going to start with the ability to protect all these different sources of data that we've talked about. Data that's living native in AWS or Azure. I think I saw a question, can Unitrends back up Azure workloads? Absolutely, yes. You can deploy our virtual appliance directly from that marketplace to start protecting cloud-based workloads. Protection for SaaS, for remote endpoints. These users, again, less sophisticated. They may not be connecting into the company VPN regularly. They may not be syncing as they should be with a SharePoint or a OneDrive. And, of course, you've got your traditional data center workloads. But we're augmenting that protection with what we call data loss prevention, and that's a lot of the integrations. About 30% of all R&D at Unitrends and at Greater Kaseya is going towards integrating these different platforms. So some of these advances are aimed at reducing the occurrence of some of those threats that we had mentioned earlier. Ransomware detection to identify anomalies in the backup data. Dark web monitoring to be constantly on the look and alerting you to compromised or stolen credentials. And phishing defense to more readily enable your users and those frontline workers to take a more active role in defending the organization, training, actionable buttons, self-quarantining emails, things of that nature to minimize those click-throughs to reduce those occurrences of events. We certainly realize that things happen. There are blips. A lot of times, hey, we've lost a file. We need to recover it. You've got that DIY reset button, if you will, to recover that data when and where you need. And we'll talk through some of those different deployment options. But in addition to the backup and the restore and the data loss prevention, we aim to build in even more automation, the ability to orchestrate out recovery and automate compliance testing by executing in a sandbox a defined boot order application-specific scripts, validating out profiles and services for your applications. The intelligent alerting engine for the platform is focused on really driving down and cutting through that noise so that you can focus on the most important alerts and really what matters most for you. If you disable the backup schedule for a key database, for example, while you're applying an update, you forget to turn it on. Something else comes up. There's another interruption. The system, the intelligent engine, will alert you. Maybe 2 days go by without a backup. It'll ping to you, hey, Adam, this SQL host hasn't undergone a backup in 2 days, was previously in a schedule. Did you mean to leave this off so that you can really, again, prioritize those alerts and the action that you are taking? And we want to solve some of those challenges in the production environment by automating and leveraging our automation for more of the infrastructure use case, solving errors around VSS services, ensuring you've got enough disk space to be able to mount a VMDK before you take a snapshot of VMware, for example. And all of this is being managed from a central platform, and you've got a single pane of glass, what we call our UniView, to drill down and handle these initial approaches. It starts typically with our hybrid cloud appliances designed to protect your data center or your infrastructure as a service workload. support for more than 250 operating systems, hypervisors, and applications. So you don't need disparate products for your physical environment and your virtual environment. It's all one local appliance. But we've also augmented and built in a lot of those supplemental tasks, your reporting, your recovery testing, post-backup processing such as compression and data deduplication are all being performed by the appliance. You're not bringing in additional proxies, your own databases. All of those engines have been built into the backup appliance. We also have a cloud-to-cloud backup service, SaaS backup, for protecting O365, Google Workspace, or I should say Microsoft 365 today, Google Workspace, as well as Salesforce. And the last piece is harden some of our existing technology, direct-to-cloud backup, to really strengthen and ensure that we've got good, reliable backups over the WAN for endpoints, laptops, and even some more basic file server data that might be a little bit more remote. So when we talk about future-proofing and enabling users to do a little bit more with Next, I want to talk a little bit about that hybrid cloud solution. You've got flexibility in how you can deploy us locally in terms of either a purpose-built capacity-based appliance, our recovery series, in which the hardware and software is already pre-tuned and pre-installed based on the volume of data that you're looking to protect, the retention requirements that you have locally, or you could leverage our Unitrends backup. It deploys as a virtual appliance on VMware ESXi, on Hyper-V, Nutanix AHV, or Citrix Zen. So you can spin that up as a virtual appliance on the hypervisor of your choice, and again, protect all those different assets across your local environment, agent-based protection, host-level protection, or snapshots for your virtual infrastructure, as well as specific application protection. If you need more granular control over things such as Exchange, SQL, Oracle databases, deploy in the Unitrends agents to access things like log truncation and supporting some of those full recovery models, the bulk log recovery models that you may have. Now, the local protection is great, but it's critically important that we get copies of data off-site. And usually, we're able to do so in a number of different ways. We may, for keeping costs low, opt to replicate backup copies to a removable media target or a local media target, such as a NAS or a SAN, maybe removable disk, or even tape. This is great for creating that air gap, ensuring that you've got clean backup copies that can be securely removed or disconnected from the network and stored at a safe location off-site. The disadvantage to kind of the cost-optimized approach is that your recovery times are going to suffer. You've got to retrieve that media, rehydrate it before you can initiate those recoveries. So to really optimize recovery, we can also replicate over the WAN to the hot site. Now, we're using WAN accelerated replication, so the data is compressed, deduplicated, it's encrypted, AES-256-bit encryption. We also use things like simple rate limits, source querying, a number of means to ensure that data flow is optimized. And based on our best practices, usually it's going to be incremental as well. So we're going to be sending minimal changes over the WAN to land at your recovery target. Now, this could be an alternate site, hardware or software, replicating to hardware or software. You can mix and match based on the best availability of resources at either of those sites. So in government and education, this could be you're managing one appliance at City Hall and another at the police station. Maybe one appliance sits at City Hall, another sits in the high school. We've seen all sorts of mixing and matching for these organizations to build in that redundancy, ensure that they've got a secondary hot copy that's immediately available for recovery. If you're a little bit smaller, maybe a single school, a private academy, you can replicate to a cloud target. If you don't have an off-site location, the Unitrends Cloud has been built specifically to enable our customers with long-term data retention, as well as our disaster recovery as a service. You could also leverage AWS or Azure to store those backup copies and land backup copies in the public cloud, where they're stored again in a warm state, available for DR. So a lot of different choices here to find the best balance of feature, functionality, and cost for your organization. Helix we talked about a little bit, and again, this is a really little cool piece of our solution that is completely hands-free, but it's managing and looking for issues in that production environment, adding in resiliency and bringing more automation into the infrastructure use case that we had mentioned. You've got confidence. So rather than coming in on a Monday morning, we know how hellish those can be at times. Instead of coming into a litany of failed backups from your appliance, you might come into an email from Helix, and it says, Adam, we noticed that a particular service on your Exchange host 01 was in a failed state. We were set to take a backup in an hour. It wasn't going to be successful, so we safely restarted that service based on our parameters. When the backup kicked off an hour later, it was successful. So you get a little email detailing the remediation action rather than all of these errors and warnings across your backup appliance and your logs notating that something's gone wrong. We just want to bring you that productivity and reduce some of that manual troubleshooting across the environment. I'm seeing some questions about ransomware, and I'm happy to answer those as we get into the Q&A, but I also want to explain a little bit more about the three-pronged approach that we're taking to help protect environments from this threat. The first is in our hardened kernel. We're written on a hardened Linux CentOS kernel, which affords us two key advantages. The majority of the binary out there is targeting Windows-based systems or looking for common Windows backup file extensions across the network. So in addition to being less targeted, the hierarchical permissions model of the Linux architecture makes it very difficult for a threat actor to gain the level of root access that's necessary when you're following security protocols and best practices to get the level of access that would be needed to encrypt or change backups once they're written to the data store. An additional layer of protection could be replicating to the Unitrends cloud, for example, where those backups are immutable. Once they're landed in the cloud, there are no write permissions from your appliance or any appliance to a cloud-based backup copy. On the front end, all of our appliances are armed with a machine learning algorithm, artificial intelligence, that establishes baseline patterns of behavior for the assets across your network that we are protecting. So we're looking at things such as rates of change, the overall entropy or the randomness of the data, to establish a pattern. When threat conditions are met, it triggers a proactive alert through our UI dashboard, our email notifications, so you can investigate the source of the anomaly. We're looking at the data through a different lens, taking a different approach than your traditional security tools to identify those anomalies. And if it is deemed that there is infection, you've taken the right steps to quarantine the machine, disconnect it from the network, ensure that you're able to trace or find any other machines that might be impacted. The last piece comes in that full level of confidence that you've got a backup that is fully recoverable. Recovery assurance is our automated recovery testing. You can run this on an external host for your testing. You can even run these now with our newest update directly on your Unitrends appliance. What we would do, for example, is grab either one or a group of your most recent backups and spin them up in an isolated environment. As I mentioned earlier, you're defining things such as the boot order, the credentials that we're going to test. You might re-IP or re-network in those machines to define different parameters upon recovery. And the last piece of that test, after booting the machines, we will execute canned scripts, or you can write your own custom scripting through Batch or PowerShell to validate the underlying services. So if you're testing a restore for Active Directory, you want to ensure that NTDS works. We'll execute and test that service. Similarly, for a web host, we want to ensure that IIS is running. We can publish and post that website. SQL queries are producing the intended output. On and on and on. You define that success criteria, what recovery needs to look like for you, and you can kind of see in that broken out there, we're going to benchmark the recovery point and the recovery time actuals that we get during this test, as well as the results of the application performance, successful warnings or failures that are in there. So you can see at a glance, anytime you come into your dashboard, exactly where you stand from a recoverability standpoint. That's run automated. Once you set it up, you define that schedule, you see the reporting, you only take action when you get that warning, and the different reporting will certify those backups so you can see when you're going to perform a restore, the backups that have already been certified or tested. They're indicated and marked in the appliance visually, make it very clear to see that you have a tested versus an untested backup. The other piece when it comes to the Unitrends cloud, I talked about long-term data retention and disaster recovery as a service. We've really tuned our cloud environment to remove a lot of that guesswork, to give our customers a more predictable approach. So the Unitrends cloud is based on the amount of data that you're looking to protect, not ultimately what's going to be stored in the cloud. If you have student records, for example, that represent a terabyte of data, you're licensing out for that 1 terabyte, not what it's going to look like after 5 or 7 years of retention. All of the recovery is entirely self-service from the same local appliance UI. There are no additional fees for data transfer in and out. It's your data. You can recall it and use it from the cloud as needed. All data is encrypted, military grade, in flight, and at rest. The data centers are SSA 18 certified cloud data centers. I know that we've got customers that are using the data centers that do have requirements under the Freedom of Information Act, for example, under FERPA as well. So I know that we do have customers in the space that are leveraging Unitrends Cloud. And there's one great example. I'll share with you a quick story before we wrap up here from one of our customers I had the opportunity to chat with Donaldson Christian Academy. So they're a private K-4 through 12 school. They've got one technology director who's responsible for more than 800 students and about 55 faculty and staff. They're based in the Nashville, Tennessee area and has been serving the local community since 1971. They'd spent a number of years before Unitrends with a managed service provider, but they didn't like the lack of control. They were looking to bring recovery back in-house, looking specifically for a solution that would be a fit for a mixed environment, enable faster RTOs and self-service for their tech director, Kevin, and provide them with a secure method to store data off-site for long-term retention. So they looked at a couple of different appliance-based solutions. They ran through testing, about 45 days evaluation on-premise, and they decided to go with Unitrends as the other appliances that they brought in required more intensive testing, patching, and troubleshooting during that window. So they've deployed their appliance, and fast forward now to March 2nd of 2020, and a tornado struck down in Nashville just after midnight. It continued into the early hours of the morning on March 3rd. It was rated as severely as an EF4. I'm not a meteorologist, so when I was reading the story, I had to look this up. The winds were between 160 and 200 miles per hour. When it was all said and done, this was the sixth most costly tornado in U.S. history, leaving 300 injured, 70,000 residents without power, and total damages in excess of $1.6 billion in the greater Nashville area. Now, our friends at Donaldson were in the storm's path. You can see kind of in that pile of rubble next to the building in the top left, that's now the Christian Academy's data center. They were directly in the storm's path, and that's really where Kevin's story begins. He told us, quote, "Parts of campus were destroyed. All of our data and communications lines were down. The server room was out. We had no access to any of our servers. Internet was down at the school." Really critical to them was their accounting system. They run it on QuickBooks, and all of the data was on a virtualized Windows server. Now, they had been replicating this data to the Unitrends cloud as part of their strategy, and to begin that recovery process, he called up the Unitrends support team. We helped him get connection established to the cloud target to start to download that data back. He's bringing that data back down. He's re-importing it, and he's able to get the QuickBooks system and the data loaded onto the CFO's laptop and have him back to work within 48 hours. So he told us he was incredibly thankful for the ease of getting that data back with the help of our support team. And after some construction efforts, the school formally reopened in August and welcome back their students to campus under COVID-19 protocols. The other piece, we've talked a lot about the hybrid cloud appliances, is spanning backup for those SaaS applications, as we've mentioned earlier. And Spanning's a leader in cloud-to-cloud backup. They're trusted by more than 10,000 organizations worldwide to provide them with that enterprise-class data protection for O365, Google Workspace, and Salesforce. They enable end users as well as administrators to quickly find and restore lost or deleted data in just a few clicks. And they're really embracing an approach to data protection for business continuity. We've augmented this solution with additional functionality. We mentioned this earlier, helping organizations reduce the frequency and the severity of data loss through the dark web monitoring and the phishing defense. So ultimately, you've got that single view for all of the different approaches, the hybrid cloud appliances for your data center and cloud backup, fast backup, as well as that direct-to-cloud piece. So when we look at some of those problems and what we're driving at, when you're going from fragmented to being more complete and unified, it starts with being able to manage all of that different data in those different locations, but it's not just the backup side of things. As we're looking more into responding and enabling users to respond to account takeover attacks, the threat of phishing, that human protection, being able to do all of that in one place, a single user through SSO and with one call to support it all, we feel that that's a big piece of the simplicity of being complete. We've got these different approaches because complete to us doesn't mean that we're going to shoehorn O365 data, try and download that back into an on-premise appliance. That approach might not be right for data in the cloud. It's all about leveraging what's right for your data, your environment to meet your objectives. And we've made a lot of headway in getting there. Automation to help protect against the way people are attacking things, the ways in which they want backups to fail. There are aspects out of control of backup solutions, but bringing more automation into the infrastructure components, as we've talked about with Helix, is another way in which we're trying to differentiate a gap in the market that we wanted to fill. And being priced right, I saw some questions come in on the chat about the pricing and the licensing, but it isn't just about the initial price tag, but is the model flexible and is it predictable? There's a lot of unpredictability in the cloud. We hear this all the time about users that they don't really have a good grasp on what they're going to pay depending on how they choose to implement it. And that's where we're taking a BCDR approach to cloud that's more specific around your data size, not how much you're going to need for 3 or 5 years of retention. It's something that it's going to help. But as you start to shift from one approach to the next, as on-prem data moves into the cloud or into O365, Microsoft 365, I apologize, I keep calling it O365. But for example, we've got the ability to future-proof that. There's more to come. We're still working on some things, but we're very, very excited about being able to have that adaptability. Awesome, David. I apologize if I've gone on a little long here, but I'm ready to open things back up for our Q&A.
Absolutely, yeah. Great presentation. Take a breath, take a drink, Adam. As always, a ton of information packed into a short presentation relatively. So thank you so much. We do have some questions for you from the audience. And while we do that, I'm just going to bring up the poll that we have at the end of all of these sessions where we ask for your feedback and what additional information you would like about the Unitrend solution. So I'll just leave that up there for a while we do our Q&A. So I know you answered a number of the questions that came in during the presentation. Let's see, one of the questions I wanted to ask you here is about the licensing model for this. Unitrend has hardware and software, and how do folks choose and which solution would be licensed in what way?
So I think that one of the things that we're really cognizant of is understanding the situation and the environment and overall the recovery goals. So I think that we always want to start as Stephen Covey wrote in his book, begin with the end in mind. So think about the approach that we need to take for that data and what's going to be the right fit for the environment. If you've got an environment with a lot of different machines, there's a mixed environment, you've got a lot of hosts, but they're very small. Our appliance might be better because it's based on a capacity basis. So we're not looking at the number of hosts that are licensed out. We're looking at the capacity of the data that we're looking to protect. An environment that might have a handful of VM hosts and maybe a couple of standalone physical servers, but they've got adequate compute and storage to dedicate to the backup environment. That might be a great fit for our virtual appliance. But we also have on the recovery series additional resources. So these are provisioned with compute and memory, not just for local backup and recovery processes, but if you needed to store replicas of mission-critical Windows assets or VMware VMs, store those directly on the appliance, boot them up in an outage or in kind of a disaster scenario. You can run workloads directly on top of our appliance. So we want to look at the situation of the environment and the budget. I don't want to speak for our sales teams, but I know that they're always trying to keep their pencils sharp. We would never want something like price to be completely prohibitive or take us out of the conversation. So I know that there's a lot of flexibility in how we can approach those different environments, whether it's hardware or software, kind of looking at things at how much data do you need to protect, what resources do you have available, and not just the volume of data, but what does it look like? Is it on a number of physical hosts? Is it mostly contained to a couple of virtual hosts that are running a number of VMs? So there's some difference there that may factor into the licensing approach, whether we want to go with a per capacity or per resource licensing model.
Got it. Okay. So that's great. And you all can help folks with that decision and keep the end in mind. I like that. Next question that came in, they're asking about compliance when it comes to government, public sector organizations like on the event today. Is the Unitrend Cloud compliant?
So we do maintain a number of certifications and compliances. I know that with the levels of encryption and the retention periods that we offer, we can help organizations maintain HIPAA compliance. We are SOC 2 Type 2 certified. We do adhere to GDPR. I know that I was looking a little bit, and some of these compliances regards or relate to the level of encryption. So we are using a FIPS 140-2 certified encryption. It's AES 256-bit encryption. Our cloud environment has a number of rigorous controls with regards to access, monitoring, et cetera. So we do have a number of organizations worldwide, whether they're in the U.S., in Canada, in the UK, that are leveraging the Unitrend Cloud. The Cloud FAQ on our website is a great place to read a little bit more about those security and controls. And if you do need more information, we can certainly comply and provide additional details. Depending on what you need to see, they may ask for an NDA, but we can certainly facilitate that conversation.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Let's see. Another question. What about immutability in the age of ransomware? They're asking here, can Unitrends make a backup target immutable?
So the Unitrends Cloud is one option that you would have for that immutability. Once backups are written to the cloud, your appliance, no other appliance has any access or any write permissions to that repository. You could make use of removable media, but then it's physically disconnected from the network. So you set for example, kind of a simplified workflow here. You set a backup policy for some of your mission critical machines. That policy then creates the backup. That backup is then put into a test for recovery assurance. We validate that the backup is fully functional. It's clean of malware. You can run scans with CLAM AV as part of our recovery assurance to ensure that the backups are free of malware signatures. And then once that backup has been tested, can replicate or create a backup copy that's being sent to disk or tape, some other sort of portable media, so you can physically disconnect it from the network. So there are a couple of different ways to achieve that immutability. The appliances themselves are hardened. I had it from support that there's never been an instance where the customer's been following security practices where the appliance's data store has been encrypted by ransomware. We actually had a manufacturing customer of ours that had 400 VMs encrypted. Their EMC storage array on the back end was encrypted. The Unitrends appliance was unaffected. And we've also seen people get creative with how they deploy those. They may manage strictly updates via CD-ROM or via DVD. They may not want to connect the appliance to the internet. So there are a few different ways in which we can help you meet those security objectives, but certainly immutability is one aspect, and we can do so in a couple of ways where we're replicating that data too.
Excellent. Excellent. And then another question, what's the benefit of Unitrends Cloud over, say, using like AWS?
So I think that the biggest one that stands out for me is the predictability, and I do want to make sure that I don't misrepresent our cloud services. We've delivered this and really tuned our operations to accommodate a couple of key use cases for our customers. It's the long-term data retention and the disaster recovery as a service. So for one, that white glove, hands-free spin-up where you simply place a phone call, make that disaster declaration, and we begin rehydrating and recovering those workloads on our target and then helping you to reroute that user traffic is one differentiator. But the licensing model as well is designed to look at the data that we have today. What is that footprint again? For example, if it's student records, that is 500 gigs of student record data. We're going to look at that and then determine the retention period that you need, and that's going to be built into the contract. But the cost is predictable and it's fixed. So we're looking at the volume and the retention, not the accumulation of backup copies, not the accumulation of data over time as that continues to build. It's looking at that initial volume, and then the retention build out is already included. So it's a very predictable and forecastable model for our customers.
Nice. And then there's a couple questions here about security and encryption. Do you offer encryption, and what level is available?
So we do. Unitrends does offer encryption for backups both in flight and at rest. We use an AES-256-bit encryption. It is a FIPS compliant standard for encryption.
Excellent. And it looks like we're starting to run out of time here on the event for our Q&A, but I mean, we have some more technical questions there in the queue. Maybe you can respond to after the event. I guess final question, what should folks do to get started with Unitrends?
I think that there are a couple of things. We've got a little handout that's been posted in the attachment section or in the handout section. You can certainly view that, but other than that, I would encourage everyone to visit unitrends.com, www.unitrends.com. We've got a number of free resources from BCDR maturity assessments, free tools, software downloads and trials. So give us a check out if you're interested in seeing what we can do for you.
Excellent. All right. It's always great to have you on, Adam. Thanks so much.
Awesome. David, always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
And thanks to Unitrends, of course, for supporting the event. As Adam said, check out the handout there in the audience console for more information specifically on educational and government institutions around data protection and DR. Should be a valuable resource. And of course, don't forget about the poll question on the screen. I'm just going to leave that up while I announce our final Amazon $500 gift card winner. This is going out to Nicholas Coronaros from Illinois. Congratulations. Nicholas Coronaros from Illinois. I'll post all 3 gift card winners from the event today in the questions box. Doing that now. And again, don't forget about the poll question there on the screen because we are moving on now to wrap up the event. I want to remind everyone, of course, to check out the Actual Tech Media social channels, the 10 on Tech podcast, as well as our LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook channels. If you are an upcoming sponsor or you would like to sponsor on an upcoming EcoCast or MegaCast or Summit event, reach out to us at connect@actualtechmedia.com, and we would love to chat with you. And then finally, I hope that you'll join us tomorrow. In fact, we have another EcoCast on comparing traditional versus next-gen edge security solutions. On the event, you'll hear from Rapid7, Wind River, Illumio, and Sequence Security, and we'll have a special keynote presentation by Corey Younger, who's an author, analyst, and evangelist, talking about her best practices and recommendations for comparing these traditional versus the next-gen edge security solutions. So I hope that you'll join us on the EcoCast tomorrow. After this event, you'll be automatically redirected to events.actualtechmedia.com, where you can register for this upcoming EcoCast happening tomorrow if you aren't already registered. So we hope to see you there. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.